Let me ask you something. Have you ever started a new open world game and felt excited at first, but 20 hours later opened the map and thought, I really don't want to do all of this? Not because the game is bad, not because the combat is boring, not because the story is weak, but because the map is overwhelming. You zoom out, and suddenly there are hundreds of icons, camps, side quests, collectibles, activities. And instead of feeling like an adventure, the game starts to feel like a job. You are not exploring anymore, you are clearing tasks, and here is the weird part. Open world games were supposed to give us freedom, but for many players today, they do the exact opposite. They create fatigue. Players are getting tired of open worlds, not because the idea is bad, but because the industry turned freedom into a formula. And today I want to break down why that happened, why so many open world games start with excitement but end with exhaustion, and more importantly, what the genre needs to change if it wants to survive. To understand why players are getting tired of open worlds today, we need to go back for a moment. Back to a time when the open worlds actually felt special. Because there was a time when simply seeing a massive world in game felt almost unbelievable. You would start a new game, look at the horizon, and realize something incredible. You could go anywhere. Not just where the story told you to go, not just through a corridor designed by developers. Anywhere. If you saw a mountain in the distance, you could try to reach it. If there was a strange ruin far away, you could walk there just to see what was inside. And that feeling was powerful, because it created the illusion that the world decided beyond you, not as a level, but as a place. You weren't just completing missions, you were exploring, and for many players that feeling was evolutionary. Games suddenly felt bigger than their mechanics, bigger than their quest, bigger than the main story. The world itself became part of the experience. And for a while, that magic worked. Because open worlds were still relatively rare. They were ambitious projects, not something every studio was trying to do. But then something changed. Open worlds stopped being an artistic choice. They became an expectation. Today, when a big game is announced, players almost automatically assume it will have an open world. And if it doesn't, people start asking questions. Wait, the game is linear? Is the world small? Is there enough content? And suddenly the size of the world becomes part of how we measure the value of a game. The logic is simple. If a game costs $70, it should last a long time. And if it lasts a long time, the world needs to be big, really big. But that shift created a strange situation. Open worlds were originally designed to create freedom. Now they are often designed to justify scale. And when scale becomes the main goal, the design of the world starts changing. Developers begin asking different questions. Not, how can we make this world interesting to explore, but how can we make this world big enough to fill 40, 50, or even 100 hours of gameplay? And once that question becomes the priority, the entire philosophy of open world design begins to change. Because building a truly dense, handcrafted world is incredibly difficult. It takes time, it takes creativity, it takes risk. But filling a huge world with repeatable activities, that's much easier. And slowly, over the years, the industry began drifting toward that solution. Worlds got bigger, maps got larger, playtime numbers kept increasing. But something else quietly started disappearing. The feeling of discovery. But once open worlds became the standard, something else happened. The industry discovered a formula, and once that formula proved successful, studios started repeating it over and over again. If you played enough open world games over the past decade, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. You start the game, the map is hidden at first, but then you climb a tower, or unlock a viewpoint, or reach some kind of observation point, and suddenly the map fills with icons. Camps, side quests, collectibles, enemy bases, activities. And at first it feels exciting, because it looks like there is so much to do. But after a few hours, something strange happens. You begin to realize that most of those activities are the same. One enemy camp, then another, then another. Maybe the enemies look slightly different, maybe the environment changed, but the structure stays the same. Clear the camp, get the reward. Move to the next icon, clear the camp, get the reward. Move to the next icon. And slowly, without even noticing it, the game stops feeling like a world and starts feeling like a system. You are not exploring anymore, you are processing tasks, you are clearing icons from the map, and once the player brain recognizes the pattern, the entire experience changes. Because humans are extremely good at recognizing systems, and once we understand the system, we start optimizing it. Instead of asking what's over there, we start asking how quickly can I clear this area. And that shift is incredibly important, because the moment you start optimizing a game, it stops feeling like an adventure. It becomes a checklist. You are not discovering things anymore, you are completing objectives, and that is when the fatigue begins. The strange thing is that many of those games are still very good games. Take games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla. The world is beautiful, the production value is massive, the scale is impressive. But after dozens of hours, many players start noticing something. The activities begin to blur together. Another camp, another raid, another objective marker. And the same thing can happen in games like Far Cry 6. Large map, lots of things to do, but much of the gameplay loop revolves around repeating the same structure in different locations, again and again. And to be clear, this is not about calling these games bad. It's about recognizing a pattern that has slowly taken over the genre. A pattern where the world is designed not around discovery, but around content distribution. Developers need to fill a huge map, so they distribute activities across it. But when too many of those activities follow the same formula, the world begins to lose its sense of mystery. And mystery is the entire reason open worlds work in the first place. Because an open world without mystery is just a very large level. And this is where the real problem starts to appear. Because the issue with modern open worlds is not just repetition, it's something more subtle, something psychological. At some point, exploration quietly turns into work. Think about what usually happens when you open a map in a modern open world game. You zoom out, and the screen is filled with icons. Side quests, enemy camps, treasure locations, collectibles, activities. At first it looks exciting. It feels like the world is full of possibilities. But after a while, the same system that once looked exciting begins to create a strange kind of pressure. Because every icon represents something unfinished, something waiting to be completed, something you haven't done yet. And the human brain is incredibly sensitive to unfinished tasks. There is actually a psychological phenomenon behind this. It's called the Garnick effect. The basic idea is simple. People remember unfinished tasks better than completed ones. Unfinished things stay in the back of your mind. They create tension. Now imagine applying that effect to a map with hundreds of icons. Suddenly the open world stops feeling like a playground. It starts feeling like a to-do list. Instead of asking yourself, what do I want to explore today? You start asking, what should I clear next? And that tiny shift in mindset completely changed how the game feels. Because curiosity disappears and obligation takes its place. You are no longer exploring because something caught your attention. You are exploring because something is waiting to be cleared. And once that happens, the entire emotional experience changes. At that point, the world stops feeling mysterious. It becomes predictable. You already know what most icons represent. Another camp, another collectible, another small activity, another box to check. And when the brain predicts what's going to happen before it even happens, the sense of discovery disappears. And discovery is the entire foundation of open world design. Without discovery, the world is just big. Not exciting, not mysterious, just big. And eventually, that size starts working against the player, because the map becomes intimidating. You open it and realize there is still an enormous amount of things left to do. Instead of feeling excited, you feel exhausted. And sometimes players stop playing not because the game is bad, but because finishing it feels overwhelming. This is one of the biggest paradoxes of modern open worlds. Developers add more content to make the game feel bigger, but the more content they add, the easier it becomes for the player to burn out. What was supposed to create freedom ends up creating fatigue, and the player slowly starts asking different questions. Not what's over there, but do I really want to keep doing this? At that point, the open world starts feeling like a world, and starts feeling like a system of tasks. But here's the important thing. The problem is not the open world itself. The problem is how it's designed. Because there are still games that prove that genre can work incredibly well. Games where exploration doesn't feel like a checklist. Games where the world actually feels alive. One of the best examples is Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. What makes that world different is surprisingly simple. The game doesn't overwhelm you with icons. When you open the map, you don't see hundreds of markers telling you what to do. Instead, you see something much more powerful. You see the horizon, mountains in the distance, strange ruins, unusual shapes in the landscapes. And your curiosity takes over. You start asking questions. What is the structure? What is on top of that mountain? Can I even get there? And that curiosity becomes the main driving force behind exploration. Not the interface, not the map, your own interest. The game trusts the player to discover things naturally, and that single design decision completely changed how the world feels. Instead of clearing tasks, you are following your instincts. Another great example is Elden Ring. This game does something many modern open worlds are afraid to do. It stays quiet. It doesn't constantly guide you. It doesn't bombard you with objectives. The world simply exists. And because the game refuses to explain everything, the player becomes curious. You see a strange building in the distance, you walk toward it, you don't know what you will find. Maybe it's a dungeon, maybe it's a boss, maybe it's something completely unexpected. And that uncertainty creates tension. It creates excitement. It recreates the feeling that open worlds were supposed to give us in the first place. The feeling that anything could happen. The difference between these games and many open worlds is not just equality, it's a philosophy. Some worlds are built around content density, others are built around player curiosity. One approach fills the map with activities, the other lets players create their own path. And that difference changed everything, because when exploration is driven by curiosity, players don't feel pressure, they feel adventure. At this point, you might be wondering something. If players are getting tired of this formula, why do so many studios keep making games this way? Why do we keep seeing massive maps, hundreds of icons, and the same gameplay loops repeated across dozens of hours? The answer is not laziness, and it is not a lack of talent. The answer is risk. Modern AAA games are incredibly expensive to make. Some of them cost hundreds of millions of dollars. They take 5, sometimes even 7 years to develop. And when that much money is on the line, studios become extremely careful, because failure at the scale can be devastating. So instead of experimenting too much, many developers rely on systems that have already proven successful. Large maps, repeatable activities, progression systems that keep players busy for dozens of hours. These elements are predictable, they are safe, and most importantly, they help justify the price of a full-priced game. If a player pays $70 for a game, they expect it to last a long time. And from a marketing perspective, it's much easier to sell a game by saying over 100 hours of content, even if a significant portion of that time is built around repeating similar activities. Because on paper scale looks impressive, it sounds impressive, and for many players it feels like good value. So studios are not necessarily trying to create exhaustive worlds, they are trying to create worlds that feel big enough to justify their cost. But the problem is bigger is not always better. And over time, players have started noticing the difference between a world that is big and a world that is interesting. So where does it leave us? Are open worlds actually dying? Not really. The idea of a vast world that players can explore freely is still one of the most powerful concepts in game design. That dream has not disappeared, but something else has happened. Players have become more experienced. We have seen dozens of open worlds. We recognize the patterns much faster. We know what a camp looks like before we even reach it. We know what a collectible icon usually means. And once players start recognizing the system behind the world, the illusion starts to break. Because an open world only works when it feels unpredictable, when it feels like something unexpected might happen at any moment. When you walk in a random direction, not because the map tells you to, but because you are genuinely curious about what might be there. That is the magic genre was built on. Curiosity, discovery, the feeling that the world is bigger than you are. But when the map is filled with icons, when every activity follows a predictable structure, that feeling slowly disappears. The world becomes organized, efficient, understandable. And once everything becomes understandable, it stops being mysterious. And without mystery, an open world is just a large environment, not an adventure. So maybe the future of open worlds is not about making them bigger, maybe it's about making them denser. More unique moments, more unexpected encounters, more situations that players didn't see coming. Less focus on filling maps with activities, more focus on creating moments that player will actually remember. Because when you look back at the best open world experiences, people rarely talk about how many icons they cleared. They talk about moments. A strange player they accidentally discovered, a fight they barely survived, a secret they weren't supposed to find. Those are the things that make a world feel alive, and if the industry can return to that philosophy, open world won't disappear. They will evolve. But if the genre continues chasing scale above everything else, players will keep feeling the same thing many of us feel today. Excitement at the beginning, fatigue somewhere in the middle, and a map that suddenly feels much bigger than it actually wanted to be. And now I'm curious about something. What do you think? Are players really getting tired of open worlds, or do you think the genre just needs to change? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy deep dives like this about game design and the gaming industry, consider subscribing, because there is a lot more to talk about, and trust me, this is just the beginning.